So when I was in first grade, I fell in love. Her name was Emily Baker, and she was the most beautiful girl in my class of 25 kids. You see, our relationship started when we went on a field trip to an industrial bakery, and I still remember very clearly what all transpired. She came right up next to me, and she did the unthinkable. She held my hand. A sensation of electricity flew from my fingertips through my arm to my brain, where I realized, oh my God, do I have a girlfriend? I looked at her bewildered, demanding an answer, and this cool girl, she doesn't even look back. She just stands there not saying a word. And that's when I knew I had a girlfriend. Fast forward to second grade, and two very tragic things happened. Number one, on the first day, I realized that Emily Baker and I are no longer in the same class. And number two, during recess, I find out that she left me for another boy. I was heartbroken. Only if I could tell her how much I really, really liked her, maybe she'll take me back. Except I couldn't. You see, a tiny detail I left out. I immigrated when I was in first grade, and I couldn't speak a word of English, so I could not literally tell her how much I liked her. I was absolutely heartbroken, and in short, I was absolutely disgusted. Now stop. Right there. Right there is one of the most beautiful, most meaningful moments in my life. That is when I got my first chip on my shoulder. Not being able to speak English was the very first chip I ever had on my shoulder. You see, this conversation today is for the losers. The losers who want to become the winners. This one is for the underdogs. The underdogs who always wanted to change themselves but didn't know how. This one is for all those who dreamed of becoming extraordinary, but today are looking down at the road of mediocrity and deluding themselves that that's what they wanted all along. This one is for you. So listen very carefully, because I'm going to tell it to you very bluntly. You have some deep insecurities. You do. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's simply because your insecurities go deeper than you can notice. See, I know this because I am one of these people. So today we're going to be talking a lot about the theme of creative chaos. Well, right now I want to talk about how to create something out of this chaotic place we call our insecurities. Now, some people call it inferiority complex. Other people call it having something to prove. I call it having a chip on your shoulder. Whatever you want to call it, just know this. That chip on your shoulder will be your single greatest asset to building your success. Now, here's the reason why having a chip on your shoulder is absolutely crucial to your success. You see, I work in venture capital, and that basically means I meet with entrepreneurs, and they pitch me their ideas, and it's really great. And if it is so great, our fund will basically invest in the startup. Now, here's one little trick that I like to use to separate the real entrepreneurs from the fake entrepreneurs. Go to an accelerator. Go to an incubator, basically anywhere where entrepreneurs gather to work together. But go between the hours of 4:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. on a Friday evening and see what you find. The hustlers, man. That's when you're going to find the hustlers. And I've talked to these hustlers, and they really have one thing in common, even though they come from all walks of life, from all sorts of different problems. That one thing is hunger. And I'm not talking about any type of hunger. I'm talking about this unforgiving, relentless type of hunger that comes from their insecurities, their fear of failure, and this desperate need to be part of something bigger than themselves. It comes from their chip on their shoulder. Where it does not come from is some market need. It doesn't come from a brilliant idea. It doesn't even come from a smart mind. It comes from deep within this insecurity place. You see, it comes from this crazy, deranged person who refuses to take a salary and a normal job just because they're obsessed to prove something to the world. It comes from their chip on their shoulder. And if you look at every one of the greatest entrepreneurs of our time, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Jack Ma, they all have this chip on their shoulder. And bigger the chip, hungrier they are. So what I want to do today is I want to walk you through how I've been thinking about my chip on my shoulder, and I want to invite you to do the same. Just walk alongside with me as I identify mine. I want you to identify yours. And as you'll see, as I walk mine back to its characteristics, I want you to do the same. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to flip your biggest liability into your biggest asset. So the first step here is to identify your chip on your shoulder. And this one's pretty easy, I like to think. Mine actually is deeply rooted in who I am. I'm an immigrant. I came from an immigrant family. And it's true that the very first chip on my shoulder is not being able to speak English, but the true story behind it is not some heartbreak I had in first grade, but the very first meal I ever had in the United States of America. I still remember very clearly, it was very late. Our family went to this fine sandwich establishment called Subway in this very exciting state called Indiana. And I still remember my 7-year-old self, my baby sister, my parents, we all kind of stumble into the Subway with 4 luggages trailing behind us. My father and I go right up to the counter, and there's a teenager right on the other side, and it becomes very clear to the 3 of us that the 2 of us do not speak English. Now, if you know anything about trying to order a Subway sandwich from a white teenager in Indiana, not speaking English is not the way to do it. You know, I was young at the time, but I knew exactly what was happening. The teenager grew very frustrated and dismissive, and my father became very small. Now, I want to tell you a little something about my father. He's a better man and a father than I will ever be. You see, when I was little, he used to be the best storyteller. He would, at bedtime, read these bedtime stories, and he would record himself on cassette tape so that when he was away during the day, I could replay his voice and I can just follow along the picture. That's the kind of man my father was. Now, I want you to imagine having this hero who lost his own father when he was in 4th grade, who put himself through college, having this hero figure in your life being reduced down to stutters as he's trying to order a sandwich from a teenager. I was young at the time, too young to articulate it, but I knew what I felt. What I felt was embarrassment. What I felt was shame. What I felt was the weight of my first chip on my shoulder. And of course, it didn't stop there. You know, I came to actually resent my Korean culture. As I grew up, I came to resent the fact that my mom, she couldn't speak English. I resented the fact that all my American friends and their parents were invited to dinner parties after their kids' football practice, but my parents weren't. But you know what I'm talking about. Because you have your own chip on your shoulder. You have your own grudge, your own resentment, your own perplexement of why things are the way they are. Now, I want you to just hold that in your mind because we're going to try to harness that today. The second step is to have the courage to start asking why and delve deeper into that chip on your shoulder. For me, this is very important because this is the hard part. See, this is where it gets ugly. This is where it gets unglamorous and negative. For me, this really happened in high school when I started to ask why. Why was it that I resented my Korean culture so much? Well, it was the reason why I couldn't speak English. Well, why did it frustrate me so much that I couldn't speak English? Well, it made me feel helpless. Why did I feel helpless? I felt like I couldn't speak up. Why was it so important that I spoke up? And what I found was that when I started to walk back my chip on my shoulder, I found that I had this core characteristic of wanting to be heard. I want to be heard. I need to be heard. That's who I am. I'm a loudmouth, obnoxious person. But you have your own, don't you? You have your own chip on your shoulder that if you walk back, I can guarantee you that you will find your own core characteristic within yourself. It will be ugly. It will be negative. But it will sound very right to you. Now, once you have identified this core characteristic, once you've been brutally honest with yourself, I've realized this, that the best and the worst versions of ourselves are oftentimes the best and the worst versions of that core characteristic. So this is what I mean. For me, my core characteristic is wanting to be heard. In its worst form, it turns me into someone who doesn't listen. It turns me into someone who's attention-seeking. It turns me into someone who needs to be the loudest voice in the room. Or it can turn me into someone who can speak up for others. It can turn me into someone who delivers a good message. It can turn me into someone who tells losers that they have what it takes to be winners. And you'll find that every core characteristic has this duality. I actually went through this exercise with one of my good friends from college, and his core characteristic is having this obsessive personality. And this is really fascinating because if you take obsessive personality and you mix it with impulse, people call that addiction. But if you take the same obsessive personality and you temper it with a sense of purpose, with a sense of mission, people happen to call it passion. So what you'll find is that for every one of these so-called weaknesses, there's just simply an unproductive manifestation of your core characteristic. And the good news here is that for every one of those, there's a corresponding productive manifestation that you can harness as your strength. Now, I know there are times when you wonder to yourself, why? Why is this the way that I am? I know. But I want to challenge you to not throw that away. This is who you are. This is who you are meant to be. This is your raw fuel and your raw material. And you are meant to harness this. You see, in first grade, I didn't speak a word of English. My very first book that I ever read was Green Eggs and Ham. And in third grade, I finished Harry Potter. In sixth grade, I tried out for the school play with my thick Korean accent. And by the end of high school, I was the captain of my speech team. And today, I'm here, speaking to all of you in English, in case you haven't noticed. So when life gives you a chip to play, never cash in. Just take that chip, place it on your shoulder, and instead of letting it weigh you down, let it ground you in who you are, and more importantly, how you can prove wrong every doubt and every self-doubt in your mind. Thank you.